My name is Rachel Morgan. I am 31 years old, and I'm from Phoenix, Arizona. What started as a phone call about death turned into the moment I finally understood who really won in my family. What would you do if your brother called you out of nowhere and said, "Mom died last night. I inherited everything. You get nothing." Would you scream, cry, beg him to show mercy? Or would you do what I did and smile? Because what if the will he's bragging about isn't the real story? What if the inheritance he thinks he won is actually a trap? And what if the quiet sibling, the one everyone ignored, was holding the only card that truly mattered? Stay till the end, because this phone call wasn't his victory. It was his mistake. I remember exactly where I was when my phone rang. It was late, one of those quiet nights where the world feels paused. I was sitting on the edge of my bed, scrolling aimlessly, pretending I wasn't waiting for bad news. When your parent is sick for a long time, you live in that space between denial and dread. When I saw my brother's name on the screen, my chest tightened. We didn't talk much anymore, not because of one big fight, but because of years of small, deliberate exclusions. Holidays where I found out plans last minute, family decisions made without my input, conversations that ended the moment I entered the room. Still, I answered. No hello, no hesitation. She died last night. For half a second, the room tilted. My ears rang. I gripped the phone harder, bracing myself for the pain that was supposed to come. I waited for him to say more, something human, something like "I'm sorry" or "this is hard." Instead, he kept going. I inherited everything, the house, the accounts, the investments. Then, after a pause that felt intentional, he added, "You get nothing." Not "I'm sorry," not "she loved you too," just a scoreboard. I didn't cry. That surprised me. Maybe because deep down, I'd been preparing for this my whole life. My brother had always treated family like a competition, and tonight he thought he'd finally won. He talked for a while. About paperwork, about how clear the will was, about how Mom had trusted him. He sounded relieved, almost excited, like he'd just closed a deal. As he spoke, I noticed something unsettling. He wasn't grieving. He was performing. Every sentence was sharpened, polished, delivered with the confidence of someone who believed the story was already finished. He wanted me to react. He wanted anger, begging, disbelief, anything that would confirm his power in that moment. So I stayed quiet. That silence stretched longer than he expected. "You there?" he asked. "Yes," I said calmly, too calmly. That's when he laughed, a short, dismissive laugh I'd heard my entire childhood, the kind that said you never mattered. "Look," he continued, lowering his voice like he was doing me a favor. "I know this is hard for you, but this is how things are. You should accept it and move on." Move on from my mother. From my childhood home, from every memory that apparently now belonged to him. I looked around my room, the cheap furniture, the boxes I never fully unpacked because I never stayed anywhere long enough to feel safe. And suddenly, something inside me went still. I realized something important. This call wasn't about inheritance. It was about humiliation. He wanted to make sure I knew my place beneath him, as always. He wanted the final word. He wanted to hear me break. But what he didn't understand was this. I had already survived worse. Years of being overlooked teaches you something powerful. You learn to observe, to listen, to notice details others ignore because they assume they're untouchable. While he was talking, bragging, explaining, my mind was moving, connecting dots, replaying conversations with my mother, remembering things he'd never bothered to ask about because he assumed he already knew everything. And that's when I smiled, not because I was happy, but because I understood something he didn't. This wasn't over. I thanked him, actually thanked him. He went quiet. "Okay," he said slowly, suspicious now. "Well, take care of yourself." The call ended. I placed my phone face down and sat there in the silence. The grief finally hit, but it came mixed with clarity, a cold, steady clarity. He thought the story ended with that phone call. He thought inheritance was just money and property. He thought winning meant taking everything away from me. What he didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that some victories look like losses at first, and some people reveal their biggest mistake the moment they believe they've already won. That phone call was meant to destroy me. Instead, it gave me confirmation. And from that moment on, I stopped reacting and started preparing. Favoritism doesn't always show up loud. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it hides behind smiles, excuses, and phrases like, "You know how your brother is," or "Just let it go, be the bigger person." Growing up, my brother was never told to be the bigger person. From the outside, we looked like a normal family. 2 kids, suburban house, birthday cakes, family photos smiling on the wall. But inside those walls, there was an unspoken hierarchy, and I learned my position early. He was celebrated. I was tolerated. When he brought home a B, my mom said he was trying his best. When I brought home an A, she asked why it wasn't an A+. When he forgot chores, it was because he was busy. When I forgot once, it became a lecture about responsibility. I remember being 7 years old, standing in the kitchen holding a broken mug. I hadn't even dropped it, he had. But he said it was mine, and without hesitation, my mom believed him. I stood there apologizing for something I didn't do, because arguing only made things worse. That was the pattern. He spoke. I adjusted. By the time we were teenagers, the favoritism wasn't even subtle anymore. My brother got privacy, excuses, and trust. I got rules, scrutiny, and suspicion. If money was tight, his needs came first. New clothes for him. Next time for me. When relatives visited, my achievements were mentioned briefly, if at all. His stories were told with pride, exaggerated and repeated, as if he were already destined for something greater. I learned not to interrupt. I learned not to ask. I learned that love in our house had conditions, and I didn't meet them as easily as he did. The worst part wasn't the unfairness, it was the loneliness. I couldn't explain it to friends because it sounded petty. "Your parents love you," people would say, and maybe they did, but love without protection feels a lot like neglect. Every time I tried to speak up, I was labeled sensitive. Every time I cried, I was told I was dramatic. Eventually, I stopped reacting altogether. That's when the silence began. I became the child who handled things on her own, the one who didn't ask for help, the one who didn't expect fairness. And somehow that independence was praised, without anyone questioning why I needed it in the first place. Meanwhile, my brother grew into the role they built for him, confident, entitled. Certain the world would always bend in his favor. When my mom got sick years later, that dynamic didn't change, it intensified. He was consulted, he was trusted, he was kept informed. I was updated after decisions were already made. Doctor appointments scheduled without me. Financial conversations I wasn't invited into. Legal matters brushed off with, "Don't worry about it." And every time I questioned it, I was made to feel guilty. "She doesn't need stress. He's handling it. You always make things complicated." So I stepped back. Not because I didn't care, but because I was tired of fighting a battle that had been decided long before I was old enough to understand it. That's why, when my brother called me the night our mother died and told me I got nothing, it hurt. But it didn't shock me. It was the final confirmation of something I had known since childhood. In his mind, inheritance wasn't taken from me. It was never meant for me. He didn't see cruelty in his words because favoritism had normalized it. He had spent his entire life being chosen, being believed, being prioritized, and I had spent mine learning how to survive without being chosen at all. What he never realized, what no one ever realized, was that growing up underestimated forces you to develop something dangerous: awareness. While he was handed confidence, I built resilience. While he relied on approval, I learned to rely on facts. While he assumed loyalty, I paid attention to patterns. Favoritism didn't break me, it sharpened me. So when he told me I was getting nothing, he thought it was the end of the story. He thought the quiet child would quietly disappear. But the truth is, I didn't lose that night. I simply stopped pretending I was still playing by their rules. And for the first time in my life, being the less important child became my greatest advantage. People assume silence means weakness, that if you don't fight back, you've already lost. That's only true when silence comes from fear. Mine didn't. After my brother's call, I didn't confront him. I didn't demand answers. I didn't post dramatic messages or call relatives crying. I did something far more unsettling to people like him. I went quiet. No reactions, no questions, no visible emotion. At first, that felt unnatural. Every instinct in me wanted to defend myself, to explain, to ask why. But I had learned something growing up in a house where speaking up only made things worse. The people with the most power are comfortable only when they know exactly where you stand. Silence takes that away. A few days after the funeral arrangements were announced, arrangements I found out about through a group message, not a phone call. My brother texted me. "Everything okay?" I stared at the message for a long time before replying. "Yes." That single word did more damage than any argument ever could. Because suddenly he didn't know what I was thinking. He was used to reactions, used to tears, frustration, explanations, used to me playing the role he assigned, emotional, predictable, smaller. My silence broke the script. Powerful people thrive on certainty, on knowing they're in control. When you don't respond the way they expect, it introduces doubt, and doubt is uncomfortable. Then came the second message. "Let me know if you need anything." That one made me pause, not because it was kind, but because it was defensive. People don't offer help unless they're trying to reassure themselves. I didn't respond. Days passed, then weeks. I attended the funeral quietly, sat in the back, didn't make eye contact, didn't cause a scene. I said polite hellos and left early. To anyone watching, I probably looked defeated, but my brother kept glancing over. Because silence is loud when someone is listening for noise. I noticed the shift in his behavior almost immediately. He started over-explaining things no one asked about. Talking too much about how clear the will was, how fair everything had been. Fair, that word appeared a lot. That's when I understood something important. When people are truly confident, they don't need to convince anyone. Silence forces powerful people to fill the gap themselves. They start talking, justifying, revealing, and I didn't interrupt. I didn't challenge, I didn't confirm or deny anything. I listened. Because silence isn't empty, it's observant. He started calling more often. Casual calls, fake concern, fishing expeditions disguised as kindness. "How are you holding up? You doing okay financially? Have you talked to anyone legally?" That last one almost made me smile. Silence turns the spotlight inward. When someone expects confrontation and gets nothing, they start questioning their own position. Did I miss something? Does she know something I do? Why isn't she upset? People in power fear one thing more than opposition: unpredictability. Anger they can manage. Sadness they can dismiss. Silence they can't read. I could feel him unraveling slowly. His voice changed. His confidence softened at the edges. He began repeating himself, reminding himself how final everything was. And the entire time I said very little, because silence buys you time. Time to think, time to observe, time to prepare. I wasn't being passive, I was being intentional. Every unanswered message shifted the balance a little more. Every calm response made him question whether he'd underestimated me again, like he always had. That's the mistake powerful people make. They believe power comes from being louder, faster, more aggressive. But real power comes from restraint, from knowing when to withhold reaction, from understanding that the person who speaks last often controls the outcome. Growing up ignored taught me how to disappear emotionally when necessary, how to stay composed while chaos unfolded around me. Back then, it was survival. Now it was strategy. My brother thought my silence meant acceptance. What it really meant was clarity. I wasn't shocked anymore. I wasn't hurt in the way he wanted, and I definitely wasn't done. Silence wasn't me giving up. It was me stepping back far enough to see the entire board. And while he kept talking, explaining, and reassuring himself, I was finally listening to the truth he didn't realize he was revealing. There's a reason my brother felt so confident on that phone call. He believed he had all the information. What he didn't understand was that confidence built on assumptions is fragile, and my family had always assumed I knew nothing. The truth is, the most important things in our family were never discussed out loud. They were hinted at, buried in half sentences. Locked away in drawers no one bothered to open because they thought they already knew what was inside, including him. Years before my mother died, during one of her quieter phases, when the illness hadn't taken her voice yet, but had softened her defenses, she asked me to help her organize some paperwork. Not my brother, me. At the time, I didn't question it. I was used to being the backup plan, the second option. But that afternoon, sitting at the dining table with folders spread out between us, I noticed something different. She was nervous. Her hands shook as she flipped through documents, separating medical records from bank statements. At one point, she stopped and looked at me, not with warmth, but with urgency. "If anything happens," she said carefully, "you'll know what to do." I remember asking, "What do you mean?" She didn't answer directly. She just slid a thin envelope toward me. No label. No explanation. "Keep this safe," she said. "Don't tell your brother about it." That was it. No dramatic confession, no emotional speech. Just a request, and a look that told me not to ask more questions. I didn't open the envelope that day. I didn't open it for a long time. Because growing up in that house taught me something else. Sometimes survival means waiting. After her death, and after my brother's call, I finally took the envelope out from where I'd stored it. The edges were worn. The paper inside felt heavier than it should have. Inside was a notarized document, not a will, something else. It was a legally binding directive outlining specific contingencies, conditions tied to assets my brother was so proudly claiming, clauses that activated only if certain behaviors occurred. Certain decisions were made, decisions he had already made. I read it 3 times before it fully sank in. This wasn't generosity, it wasn't affection, it was foresight. My mother had known exactly who my brother was. She had trusted him with power, but not without safeguards, and she had chosen me, quietly, to be the keeper of those safeguards. The document named me as the executor of a secondary trust, one my brother never knew existed because it wasn't part of the primary will. It was triggered not by death alone, but by conduct following it, and his behavior, textbook, asset consolidation without disclosure, exclusion of beneficiaries before probate finalized. Verbal declarations contradicting formal timelines, all documented, all traceable. I didn't celebrate. I didn't rush to confront him. I did what silence had already taught me to do. I called a lawyer. Not to fight, but to confirm. The lawyer's reaction was subtle, but I noticed it. The pause, the slow inhale, the shift from casual professionalism to focus. "This changes things," she said. That sentence landed heavier than any apology ever could. What my brother thought was ownership was actually temporary control. What he believed was final authority was conditional. And what he assumed was my ignorance was the very reason the document existed in the first place. I realized then why my mother had chosen me, not because she loved me more, but because she knew I would wait. People like my brother rush, they dominate, they assume speed equals strength. But legal power doesn't belong to the loudest voice, it belongs to the most patient one. Weeks passed before he sensed something was wrong. Suddenly, accounts were flagged, transfers paused. Requests delayed with vague explanations. The tone of his messages changed again, this time edged with irritation. "Do you know why this is taking so long? Have you heard anything? This should have been settled by now." I responded the same way I always had, short, calm, neutral. "No idea. Probably normal. Lawyers take time." Which wasn't a lie, he just didn't know which lawyer. The moment it finally hit him wasn't dramatic. There was no shouting. No explosive confrontation, just a phone call where his voice lacked its usual certainty. "They're asking about some document," he said. "Do you know anything about that?" I paused, just long enough. "Yes," I said. That was the first time he sounded afraid. Because in that moment, he realized the story he'd been telling himself, the one where he'd already won, had a chapter he never bothered to read, and I was holding it. The funny thing about power is that it changes hands quietly. There was no dramatic courtroom scene like you see in movies. No shouting, no gavel slam. Just a series of phone calls, delayed emails, and carefully worded letters that slowly dismantled the version of reality my brother had been living in. At first, he told himself it was a mistake. Then a misunderstanding. Then someone else's incompetence. Because when you've always been favored, you grow up believing consequences are for other people. The first real crack showed the day he showed up unannounced at my door. I hadn't seen him in person since the funeral. He looked different, tired, restless, stripped of that smug certainty he'd worn like armor. His confidence had always come from feeling untouchable. Now he looked human. "We need to talk," he said. I stepped aside and let him in. That alone unsettled him. Powerful people expect resistance or submission. Calm hospitality throws them off balance. He didn't sit. He paced, talked fast, too fast. He mentioned delays, paperwork, lawyers being dramatic. He avoided the word problem, but it hung in the room between us. Finally, he stopped pacing and looked at me. "What do you know?" he asked. I didn't answer right away. I poured myself a glass of water, took a sip, let the silence stretch just long enough to remind him who was controlling this moment. "Enough," I said. That word landed harder than any accusation. His voice dropped. "Why didn't you say anything before?" Before, as if he hadn't called me to declare victory while I was still grieving. As if he hadn't enjoyed telling me I got nothing. "I didn't need to," I replied, and that was the truth. The legal process did the talking for me. Every asset he rushed to claim triggered another safeguard. Every shortcut he took tightened the net. By the time he realized what was happening, the roles had already reversed. He wasn't the decision-maker anymore. He was being reviewed. The final meeting happened weeks later. Lawyers on both sides. Polite smiles. Carefully chosen words. I barely spoke. I didn't need to. The documents did. The trust my mother had set up wasn't about punishing him. It was about balance. Control transferred. Authority redistributed. Conditions enforced. He kept the appearance of inheritance. I held the power behind it. And the moment it was officially stated, when it was made clear who had final say, I saw something shift behind his eyes, not anger. Fear, because for the first time in his life, he couldn't talk his way out of it. He couldn't charm it, couldn't dismiss it, couldn't rewrite it. The system believed me. When the meeting ended, he tried one last time. "She would have wanted us to be a family," he said quietly. I almost laughed. Not because it wasn't sad, but because it was too late to pretend. "She did," I said. "That's why she planned ahead." That's the part people don't expect. Revenge doesn't always look like destruction. Sometimes it looks like restraint. Like fairness enforced where favoritism once ruled. I didn't take everything from him. I took the illusion that he was smarter, that he was chosen because he deserved it. That I was invisible. In the weeks that followed, he stopped calling. Relatives stopped treating me like an afterthought. Decisions suddenly required my approval. My name appeared where it never had before, not because I demanded it, because it was written. The quiet child who was overlooked didn't grow up to beg for justice. She grew up to become it. And the truth is, I didn't smile because I won. I smiled because, for the first time in my life, I wasn't underestimated anymore. And that felt better than any inheritance ever could. If this story made you feel something, if you've ever been underestimated, ignored, or written off, make sure you like this video. It tells YouTube this story deserves to be heard. Have you ever stayed silent and let someone underestimate you, only to turn the tables later? Drop your story in the comments. Someone reading it might need it more than you think. Subscribe if you believe the quiet ones are the most dangerous when pushed too far. More real stories like this are coming. This wasn't the only time my family underestimated me. Turn on notifications because the next story hits even harder. They thought silence meant weakness. If you know better, subscribe.